are very much delighted to have our dear guest in the studio, Mr. Samir Abbass. He is our Egyptologist. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. And let me start by asking, how advanced were ancient Egyptians in the field of medicine?
First of all, time-wise, we are talking about nearly 4,000, 3,000 years ago. And it's really surprising when you talk about some complicated surgeries has been made in that time. For example, one of our first or one of the most important patients we have, that was King Tutankhamun. And he had a burr hole surgery, after having an accident. That's the main cause of his death, by the way. Inner bleeding happens in his body, in his
internal
brain.
bleeding.
Yes, internal bleeding, and causing him to paralyzed. So they drill a hole in his skull to take the blood out so he can move again. And that happened 3,300 years ago.
And he was able to move.
So to have this surgery over Tutankhamun as a king himself, that means that they already did it like 100 times before, because they will not risk having a surgery for the first time. So King Tut didn't survive after this accident. There is a great debate about how he died, but that's based on the most recent research.
It was one of the biggest myths in history about the death of King Tut.
Yes, so that is very much associated with the political situation and religious situation in Egypt at that time, because his father is King Akhenaten, and I don't want to go to the political situation, but most probably there was a planned accident. Somebody wanted to kill him,
It was an attempted murder.
Yes, because of the political situation
and the conflicts at that time. Yes,
and the conflicts between the priests of God Amun and the royal family at that time. But the important thing that we have an evidence that that's King Tutankhamun. He had a burr hole surgery, which was happened for nearly 15 years ago when he had an accident. And I remember at that time that was a great tension in the family, and we had to find one of the best surgeons in order to because it's a complicated surgery.
Yeah.
This surgery we had it already made in Egypt 3,300 years ago. When it comes to medicine in ancient Egypt, it's very important to understand the foundations and where it comes from.
Yeah.
So the ancient Egyptians refer to all of their knowledge to gods and goddesses, by the way. It does make sense, because before the ancient Egyptian civilization, we don't have any other civilization older which could be a source of knowledge. So the Greeks and Romans, they are different. The Greeks and Romans, they claim that they learned their science from the ancient Egyptians, and more specified in Heliopolis, which is the city of the sun, which is North Cairo today. And when it comes to the gods who taught the ancient Egyptians science and medicine, the interesting thing that two of them, they are female goddesses, Isis and Sekhmet. And the most famous among them is Jehuti, which is a god of wisdom as well. And by the way, there is a recent movie, not mentioning the name, but recent Hollywood movie, and that deals with the gods in ancient Egypt, and they show the role of the eye of Horus, when Horus as a god, when his eye was taken out by the evil god Set, and that was restored by Jehuti. And no wonder that the eye of Horus became a symbol of medicine in ancient Egypt. So the most important god and the exceptional god, in my opinion, is Imhotep. It is a special and unique god because he was a human being and became a god. Imhotep, he lived in ancient Egypt nearly 4,650 years ago, and he was an engineering as well. He was an engineering physician, the best physician in the country. He was a good builder. He was a minister. He was a magician as well. That's one of his. And we'll talk about magic when it comes to medicine, because in ancient Egypt it's not only about like drugs. It's also about magic and hymns and spells. And so Imhotep, he was one of the best physicians in his time in the whole world. And he wrote down very important references and documentation, which is made him 1,000 years after his death as the god of medicine has been worshipped by the ancient Egyptian people and also by the Greeks and Romans after that. One of our great reference is one of the temples, which is we have in Komombo, that's in South Egypt, and we have an image for a god, possibly is Imhotep, with surgical instruments.
What were the most important doctors or during the time of the ancient Egyptians, and to what extent the medical field was important in the history of the ancient Egyptians?
I will start how it was important. So think about big projects, the Great Pyramid, more than 25,000 person workers, not slaves, workers working in this project. Think about moving like millions of stones.
Indeed.
With heavy, like 2 and 3 tons, and some of them they are 20 tons. Think about the number of injuries, possible injuries, which might happen, and we have to have a very efficient, like physicians, to treat that, to keep the workers, healthy. We found in the, and that was one of the great finds in Giza, that was burials arranged or dedicated for the workers who built the pyramids. Some of them, they have surgeries because they have broken bones, and they have been treated, and we found a perfect realignment of their bones, proving that they received the best medical treatment in that time, which that was a real surprise, and that was completely blowing away the theory of the slaves who built the pyramids, because if they were slaves, they will not have this intensive medical treatment, which is proved based on their mummies, which is found in their burials. And one of the very important resources of that is the famous Edwin Smith papyrus. Edwin Smith, unfortunately, is named after a Western person, which is he bought the papyrus that was around 1862 from the that was from the market. It wasn't illegal at that time, and from a person, his name is Mustafa Aga in Boxer in that time. So it was named after him, but it tells in details how you can treat 46 injuries, mostly dealing about broken bones. Unfortunately, this papyrus is not in Egypt, is in display in New York Academy of Medicine since.
Talking about medicine in general, it just came to my mind education right now. And I want to know, how did they study, how life was? Definitely we have some reports or documents that can tell us more about ancient Egyptians in the field of medicine. Especially, as you mentioned, their source were gods, but I know most of the pharaohs, they were half gods, half humans, but definitely there are certain people who used to teach them or something like this.
So there was a chance almost every day, ancient Egyptians, to practice medicine and to know exactly the human body, to study the human body anatomy from inside out. And we call that mummification. Almost every person who can afford mummification in ancient Egypt, he get his body mummified. And when you get to mummification, you operate the body. You make a cut in the left side, you get the inner organs out, and there is priests he might operate like 4 or 5 bodies every day doing that, and that's what they are doing in the medical college.
Yes.
But
there was a medical college during the time of the ancient Egyptians.
So you can use the word temple for the college in ancient Egypt, because almost every priest had another title, which is a scientist. He could be a doctor, he could be a physician, he could be a physician, he could be an astronomer, astronomist.
So mummification was the main source.
Was the main source, for the ancient Egyptians to develop this science. And talking about priests, while searching for some illustrations for today talk, I found. We know Edwin Smith papyrus. The papyrus which is shown now is Edwin Smith, which is the one I talked about, one of the most important reference for medicine in ancient Egypt. But I was really get very angry when I've seen that it has been modified by adding a scholar, Greek or Roman scholar, as an image to the papyrus. So they're trying to change our history, so they don't like to confess that we are the father of medicine, and that's why they Photoshop the papyrus by adding one of their own characters. And by the way, one of the most famous philosophers.
But the original copy did not include that photo.
The original copy is the illustration, if we look, that's in New York City, like in a museum in New York City now.
Well, back to, because we were talking, and even Mahesti added something.
By the way, the illustration she's showing that now that's one of the great proud of medicine in ancient Egypt. That's Hisira. And Hisira, these panels in the Egyptian Museum, by the way, it dates back to the 3rd dynasty. We're talking about 4,600 years ago. And the titles of Hisira is the best dentist in ancient Egypt 4,600 years
Again,
ago.
Mr. Abbass, I'm curious here to know about, as Nashwa was asking, about the schools and universities.
This is what I want
because
to ask.
it's very strange, because you are talking not only about mummification here, we are talking about different fields, about treatment, about dentists. So,
and definitely there was gynecology and all.
So
plastic surgery, all these things?
okay, you know, actually we have some mummies, you know, they practice plastic surgery, by the way, on not on a living person, on a dead person. And that's after people die.
But they care for the dead
Exactly,
body
you know, because
they believe that
they like
afterlife.
they like them to looks like nice, and that looks like healthy. So because they believe that they will come in the afterlife and they're best looking. And in the Egyptian Museum, in the second royal mummy room, you can find mummies which is with plastic surgeries. You know, so they can, especially those who died very old or died in accidents. They will have a plastic surgery for them. So these tools, they have been invented by the ancient Egyptian surgeons. That is nearly more than 3,000 years ago, and we're still using the same tools until today. These are surgical knives. So only the material became different, but the shape and design and the use is exactly the same.
I'm curious here, since we are talking about tools, maybe we are talking here about operations. But what about anesthesia? Do they knew anesthesia? How did they perform surgeries, or these tools were mainly used for mummification? So we are talking about after death.
So there was some sort, not exactly as advanced as today, but there is an evidence there was some sort of anesthesia, you know, that has been practiced in ancient Egypt to reduce the pain, not to kill the pain completely, so they can.
So there was some kind of anesthesia.
Yes.
To what extent it is similar to what we are having today? Or
no, they was using, you know, so if you're talking about the medicine we are using today, that was based on like a Western style medicine, which is using a very like chemicals, you know, the ancient Egyptians, they haven't used that.
But
so they have,
there might be herbs, for example,
exactly,
because herbs are used in many of the most important painkillers, actually.
Not only herb. For example, somebody had a headache, you know, so they will get and extract oil from a certain type of fish and rub your head with this oil that will cure like your headache, you know. So not just herbs, but there was some things extracted from.
So they did not use any chemical ingredients for medications. They only used herbal, or we are not sure about that.
So when you mix herbal together, you get a medical. You get chemicals as well. Exactly. You know. So that is the type of chemicals you use. But today the problem was that you extract like certain chemicals out of nature, and that makes you more subject of the side effects of such chemicals on your body, you know, using these high dose. Going back to your point, which is very important about the institutions, you know, so the temples. The temples was colleges and hospitals at the same time. And one of the famous hospitals we have is the hospital in Komombo, and the hospital, that's temple, by the way, the temple dedicated in Komombo, and that's a hospital as well, and the one in Dandara too. So in Komombo, for example, that there was the corridor around the temple, waiting room for the patient. And when you walk around the temple in the ground, you find that these patients, which maybe spent like 2 days waiting for their treatments, they left graffitis behind, and they left game boards, and showing that, you know, to get themselves busy while waiting for that. And it is the same temple which is, we have a very famous, if we can get this illustration, we have a very famous scenes of the surgical instruments, which is used back in that time, which is very much what you can see on sophisticated operation room today.
Was it limited to kings and queens, or anyone can?
No, we talked about the pyramid builder, and the pyramid builder is that's the workers.
About doctors themselves, not
the
about
doctors.
people
So that's
joining.
a good point. So first of all, there was a title for doctors at ancient Egypt, which is priests as well, called Wab. The interesting thing, Wab means to purify, to clean. So another interesting fact about medicine in ancient Egypt is by every the offering tables, which is like had food which is given to the gods and kings as well, we have always the top thing, it will be a water jar and burning incense, like a tool to burn an incense. Why? Because with the water you avoid sickness by cleaning, by washing your hand, by rinsing the food and cleaning the food, you make it actually.
And these
hygiene.
are the things that you are trying to teach people right now.
And by using the incense, you keep the flies away. And the incense will keep the flies away, you know. So the Wab means the purifier, you know. So the one who cleans the body. That was the title of priests back in that time. So that is the one which I'm talking about in Komombo temple, that's in the back of the temple. There is a wall, and that's one of the highlights of the temple, which is everybody goes there. He should go and see it. It shows surgical instruments. It shows forceps. It even shows papyrus scrolls, linen, and it shows the eyes of Horus, which is used as a balance weight, you know, for the medicine. And that's how how advanced they were back in that time. And by the way, this scene dates back nearly to 2,300 years ago.
What about the most famous doctors, Mr.
Imhotep.
Abbass?
You know, there is one of the most famous doctors, Edwin was Papyrus, which is back to 16 PC, believed to be written 1,000 years earlier by Imhotep, and has been rewritten because he used to make covers of that even in ancient Egypt. Imhotep, as a doctor, you know, so his tomb, which is not discovered yet in Saqqara, but for sure it is in Saqqara, by the way, because we found an interesting thing. We found clay pots with offerings has been carried by patients. Come to pilgrim to his tombs, dedicating him food as an offerings and asking him favor to cure their disease. That was happening 2,000 years after his death. So, you know, talking about doctors, you know, that was Imhotep when it comes to names. That is, he's the most famous one. And talking about the title, he is the Wab. And where they studied and when they practiced their medicine, that was the ancient Egyptian temples.
Well, definitely this is something of great importance, just to take a look and to learn from ancient Egyptians and how did they excel in all these things without having all the modern technology that we have these days.
So I completely agree with you when it comes that's really an interesting subject. The importance of this subject that is not dealing with everyday life. You don't have to have an interest in history, in ancient Egyptian art, to have an interest in medicine. You know, we are all subject of medicine. We are all visit a doctor, you know, like occasionally. And that's why this subject is really an interest, you know, and it is also something which is not theoretical science, which is, it's subject of debates. It's medicine, which is to get good. One of the interesting things about Edwin Smith's papyrus, by the way, it tells that these are the injuries which is they cannot cure. They were honest, you know, so, you know, these I can cure, and this, if you get this injury, if you get this disease, sorry, I cannot cure that. And that's lead to another point, which is alternative medicine in ancient Egypt. That was magic. You go to the temple.
And we are back nowadays to these alternative medication.
Yes, you know, so for things which is science cannot find in ancient Egypt, they will use hymns and spells and water poured on holy objects, collecting this water, like Tast al-Khadda today. That's one of these things, and so they can drink it and get cured.
Well, all right, Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbass, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.